So our agenda today will include MVP program updates and announcements, discussion about solar grant access, discussion about energy grant access with a close feature and presentation from our Green Communities Division Director, Joanne Becerra. And then we'll be heading into a town case study featuring the project that came out of Orange, Mass. Followed by each one will be a Q&A session, and then at the end, a full-on general Q&A as well. So as I said, if you have things that you want to put in the Q&A, please put it in the box, or we can directly let you ask the questions to our presenters as well. With that, I will hand the floor over to our MVP coordinator, Carolyn Norkowitz.
Thanks, Patrick. Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn Norkowitz, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Greater Boston Regional Coordinator for the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant Program. So I'm one of 6 regional coordinators across the state who are here to assist communities as they move through our program. So we are, for those of you who are not familiar, although I expect most of you are, we are a grant program, a partnership program to build resilience to climate change for local municipalities. And so as a state program, we award money to cities and towns for both climate adaptation related planning as well as action grants. We have been around since 2017. And you can see on the slide in the little box the now many rounds of action grants that we've been able to award over the years. And I know this map is small, but it is on our website, so you can check out what each community has been doing in our program. So it's very exciting to be able to highlight some of the great work through this webinar series. Next slide, please. A few general MVP program updates to share with you all before we dive into today's topic. As many of you know, the Environment and Climate One Stop, otherwise known as the ECO One Stop, which is our new portal, our new program for applying for MVP action grants, as well as 6 other EEA climate-related grants, is now open. Due to some technical issues earlier this week, we have extended the deadline to Friday, March 27th. So it will close at noon on Friday, March 27th. So we get an extra week. And you can access the RFR, the request for responses, on Combis, as well as through the ECO One Stop webpage. A few new resources that we're excited to highlight. The Climate Resilience Playbook was developed in partnership with 2 of our regional planning agencies, the Greater Boston Regional Planning Agency, MAPC, as well as the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission in the Pioneer Valley. And this is an online interactive tool that folks can use to help inspire and design climate change adaptation related projects, including blueprints, like actual project scopes for some really simple resilience actions that folks can be taking in their communities. We have a new Resilient Mass homepage with some links that are here. We will be sharing out these slides so you can access these resources here. We've been working on consolidating grant and program resources. We know we have so many, which is wonderful, but they can be hard to find. So there's been a big effort to consolidate and make that easier for everyone. And finally, our last update is around MVP 2.0, which is our revamped planning program. So the fiscal year 26 round of awarded communities are getting started right now. We were able to award 32 communities this round with 21 municipalities and 3 regional groups, which is very exciting. So, for communities who are involved in our program, and you have not yet been participating in MVP 2.0, you will get tapped in a year or 2, depending on how old your original MVP plan is. We're cycling through based on the age of plan. So keep your eye out. Reach out to your regional coordinator if you have questions as to when within the next few years you'll be asked to participate in 2.0. Next slide, please. All right, so finally, to the topic of the day. Today, we are going to be talking about energy resilience projects. Over the years, I've had a lot of conversations with municipalities who are really passionate about and interested in pursuing decarbonization projects, usually in the form of solar panels with a battery storage option. Um, that really straddles this world of decarbonization and resilience because you are both accessing clean energy, clean power, while also having a backup source of power for an emergency shelter or an important municipal building. Um, but there's been a lot of challenges for folks who are looking to pursue that. Oftentimes, folks just aren't really sure where to start. It can be difficult to identify the appropriate funding sources because it straddles the decarbonization and resilience fields. It's not neatly in one bucket or the other. Um, and grant timelines, particularly the state fiscal year, which is what the MVP program and many other programs are required to follow, can be really particularly challenging with these energy resilience projects because they involve so many other partners, from a utility company to a solar panel company to the municipality to sometimes there's community-based organizations. So there's a lot of players at the table so it can be difficult to kind of corral everyone to fit into a neat box of a fiscal year timeline. So we're going to so today we have brought together both Joanne Bassetta from DOER to talk about some funding opportunities through the Green Communities Program, as well as the folks from the town of Orange who have successfully done an energy resilience project through MVP. So that's all I wanted to share about MVP. If you want to search some of the other energy resilience projects we have been able to fund over the years, you can do so through our website. We have a grant viewer map, and you can search by project topic, including energy resilience. So I'm excited to be able to introduce you to some of these resources and stories today. So with that, Patrick, do I turn it back to you?
We can jump it right to Joanne.
Right
As
to
I
Joanne.
mentioned, our
Excellent.
Green Communities Division Director, Joanne Bassetta.
Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. You could go to the next slide. Thank you for inviting me to share about our green community grants. And it's really great to partner with MVP whenever we can. So here is our magic map, as you will. We have 297 designated green communities and a growing list of climate leader communities. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about two grant opportunities that we have. One is the Competitive Green Community Grant, and the other is the Climate Leader Grant. And what I have showing on the slide right now is the deadline for our current Green Community Grant. We have a program opportunity notice we issued last fall. We just awarded the first block a couple of weeks ago. The second block has a deadline of April 10th, and then again in 6 months in October, and then following in April of 2027. So this is new to us that we have one grant application and set of project types for a couple of years to enable communities and your consultants and vendors to work on projects and knowing that, you may not be able to apply this April, but in October or even next year, you'll know what project types are eligible. Next slide. Okay, this is where we have the animation, Patrick. So for generally with the green community grants, we're focusing on energy efficiency. And the maximum award for most projects is $250,000. We do have a special decarbonization grant where that award is $500,000. And then we have, we call it the high cumulative award communities or the $1 Million Club. Uh, those communities are limited to $125,000 unless they're applying for a decarbonization grant. And the reason why we do this is we want to make sure that our uh, newer green communities have access to competitive grant funding that our more veteran communities do. Next slide, please. So energy efficiency, that's, the first type of energy that we have. And we have a variety of different types of projects that we fund with the competitive grants, as you can see here. One thing I want to note is we do fund battery energy storage, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But as you can see, we're really focusing on making your facilities more energy efficient and hopefully saving cities and towns money. Next slide, please. So for battery energy storage systems, we've funded a couple of grants over the years. Basically, even though they have a resiliency component, one aspect that we do fund with the storage is that they participate in some sort of demand response or other mechanism to mitigate extra costs or charges that the municipality incurs. So that's one of the key differences maybe to some of the more resiliency only focused projects. As you can see, we have different kinds of application requirements here, but this is something that we do fund with our grants. Next slide. So we funded two to date. The town of Orange, which you'll hear about shortly, and the city of Chelsea, we're funding a battery energy storage at their city hall and police department um, for peak shaving and revenue through connected solutions, as well as they are integrated with a microgrid to allow for a black start to provide energy power when needed. That project is still in progress, and hopefully in a future presentation, we can do a case study. I just threw in a picture here of the storage project at Acton Boxborough Regional High School to give you a sense of what some of these projects can look like in terms of size and scale, because I know people are very interested in battery energy storage, what it looks like, and how big, and where they can be located. That one is in the senior parking lot. Next slide. We did not fund that, by the way, but that was just a picture I had. We also fund on-site solar. This is a new project type that we fund with green communities because, as I mentioned, we've been always focused on energy efficiency. But given the success of our grants and the progress of municipalities electrifying their buildings, we think it's time that we start supporting on-site solar for fully electrified buildings to help hedge costs related to electricity. Communities that are eligible for on-site solar PV need to be what we call specially eligible. And these are communities that have achieved a certain level of energy efficiency within their municipal portfolio. They need to be a green community in good standing. Or climate leader communities are also eligible to apply for solar PV on a green community competitive grant. Next slide. Um, and this is the funding rates that we support. It could be either, municipally owned or third party owned. Communities that or facilities that benefit in environmental justice or otherwise overburdened population get a little bit of an adder. And we'll fund anything related to the solar panels and equipment, structural systems. So if you're funding, looking to install a canopy, or that's eligible as well, interconnection and permitting, etc. Next slide, please. So, moving to the Climate Leader Community Program, this is what we call our Green Communities 2.0, if you will. These are communities that uh, build upon their green community success, meet certain requirements related to municipal decarbonization, commitment to reduce or eliminate fossil fuel use in the municipal operations, having a uh, zero emission vehicle first policy, and then lastly, adopting the specialized energy code. If you could go back to the previous slide just to, yeah,
Yep, sorry about that. I didn't mean to jump that.
yeah, you could trigger finger, that's okay. Once you become a climate leader, you're eligible for over $1 million of in grants, technical studies if you need additional engineering, scoping, things like that, and then $1 million, up to $1 million for the accelerator grant for the items that you see there. Okay, next slide. We've awarded 4 accelerator grants to date. We have 3 more we're reviewing right now, just to give you a sense of the projects that communities are applying for funding for. Next slide. And here are our Green Community Regional Coordinators, Dylan in the Northeast, Kelly in Central Mass. Mark is sitting in Western Mass. Some of you may know Chris Mason recently retired, and Lisa Sullivan in Southeast Mass, Cape and the Islands. And there's my contact information as well. And I think, Patrick, we could take a few questions if people have them now.
Yeah, so we can transition. We've already gotten a few in the chat, so we'll come in with those. So the first question is from Scott Rodman, who asks, and with the changes with power choice programs due to REC changes, has there been any discussion of whether municipalities can reallocate some funding from those programs to town-related solar projects?
Um, There hasn't been any conversation or discussion within green communities. That might be a sort of a bigger discussion working with utilities and others at DOER, but that's something we can take back and see what we can do about that.
Great. And second question is from Bill Taylor. It's a bit of a long one, so give me a second. Battery storage also can reduce the utility concern about production in the day that isn't needed with so much solar production to delay that going into the grid by shutting it to the batteries, which are tapped at night or other high demand times. So does battery storage help better utilize the production rather than not using it when there's too much power going into the grid?
Thank you for that question, Bill. Just to make sure if I understand it correctly, this you're asking about using storage to store energy generated from a solar PV and then dispatching it at night or later in the day when the sun isn't shining, or in high demand times. Yeah, that is one of the use cases for battery energy storage and something that I know the DOER certainly promotes.
Great. And then Bill had also asked about plug-in solar and its feasibility with your grants.
Those are primarily for residential purposes, and we fund municipal projects. So right now, that's not something we've seen, but if we get an application that makes sense, we'll take a look at it.
Great. And then from Ken Pruitt, so we're considering applying for a Climate Leader Decarbonization Accelerator grant for a solar project. If we start the solar project before we apply for that grant, can we still get the grant? Would the grant reimburse us for expenses incurred after that grant is awarded? Or can we only apply for a grant for a project that will not commence until after the grant is awarded?
Okay. I love these multi-part questions. Um, so we can only pay for projects or pay for parts of projects that are incurred after we sign a grant contract. So if a community starts a solar project prior to applying for a grant, that is fine, but we cannot pay for uh, costs that have been incurred prior to the contract. I don't know if that answers the question, but you're able to start a project. You don't have to wait to be awarded a grant contract to start a project. We just can't pay for things that are incurred prior to that contract, but we could pay for things going forward.
Great. And also, I do want to note for everyone in the chat that's asking questions, I'm going to be putting my email in the chat. And if you want to have further follow-up questions with us after this webinar, we're more than happy to schedule a call or follow up via email. Our next question is from Thomas Birmingham. Has the DOER explored how best to coordinate green communities related projects and funding from electricity aggregation program adder related funds?
We haven't explored it recently. It's also a good idea, but that's somewhat out of our team's bailiwick. But it's it's complicated because I know it's something that we support, but it's hard to do the coordinated aspects of it. And to be honest, we just added the solar to our grants. So the last round of awards, nobody had applied for solar. So this is a little bit of uncharted territory for us. So any of these solar related questions, these are all really good questions, and that's something that we can take back to the team and others at DOER to discuss how to deploy them. But, again, this is new territory for us.
Great, thank you. And then again, with these questions, we are kind of focused on the grants directly, as opposed to specific things and bigger questions that have to do with budget and legislation. So Kai, we have a question here about how serious is the threat to the climate leader funding through the energy bill and its potential cuts to the alternative compliance payment fund. Joanne, do you have anything that you want to say to that, or is that a bigger question?
Yeah. No, I can say that we do have our $60 million set aside for the Climate Leader Program. That is set aside and accounted for. So what happens in the future is anybody's guess, but for the time being, we do have our $60 million.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. It looks like we are through our initial questions, but Joanne will be sticking around towards the end of the presentation to have another open session as well. Next, we are going to be discussing a specific case study out of Orange, Mass, which is a highly successful solar program that has been something that we collaborated with our MVP program and also through the Green Communities program. So with that, I'm going to hand the floor to Bruce Shearer out of Orange, Mass. And Bruce, hang on, give me 1 second. I'm going to unmute you.
Okay, this will probably be more successful now.
We gotcha.
So thanks for inviting us here. And in the photo, just to let everybody know what they're looking at, this is our new expanded and remodeled Fisher Hill School on the left. And on the right-hand side and in the center, you see our outdoor classroom, which was part of the MVP grant program. So just a word about the school construction timeline. I don't have to go through the whole thing with you, but we started this back in 2016. I think I was first appointed to the committee, and the climate or the feasibility of looking at these kinds of projects was really different and the technology has really expanded and improved substantially in the 10 years or so since we started doing this. And just as kind of an update, when the school was finally completed, Gene Raymond, who was the architect, said to me, Orange will be the last fossil fueled building we build. If only if only we had gotten in under the curve. So many technologies, were sort of experimental, especially when you try to leverage pain for it. So things like geothermal, etc. But part of the community design program or process, we reached out often, and people wanted to make sure that our kids, we are in a fairly rural area, had a deep connection to the outdoors, and that outdoor classroom is located right at the edge of a large beaver pond. And we also wanted to be environmentally responsible to the extent that we could. Finding appropriate grants was not all that easy. I didn't know when I stood up at town meeting to propose funding for this project that we would be able to find the grants to be able to do it. So just a little bit of the history here, and this really gets into some of the other questions. I know Carolyn had caveats about, how to go forward with this project. The first gatekeeper is the utility, and the state of the grid in the area. So where we are, the grid was totally saturated, and we would have had to have gone into group study and individual study programs, all of that. And I can tell you that Orange is one of the poorest communities in the state, and we just didn't have the money to spend without a guarantee that we would have a project at the end that we could afford. And upgrading the grid and all of that was just simply a non-starter. So thankfully, working with Mike Piccaro from National Grid, the DPU did have a pilot project that they wanted to locate somewhere. and we had many discussions about whether or not this would be an appropriate site to do it. So the project at Orange, which is rooftop solar coupled with a battery, is no net export. So none of the electrons that we generate will ever see their way to the grid, for at least for the period of the pilot project, which is 2 years. In the ensuing time, what has happened is, the grid that is National Grid, and the grid in general, has become much more open. And I know that Bill asked a question about curtailment earlier. They've become much more open to various technologies, being able to monitor the grid in real time and allowing current to flow off-site onto the grid, and curtailing only at those critical moments. And certainly a battery is a great first place to put that power that's being generated. So
hey Bruce, why don't we let people know where Orange is and the history of the school first a little bit, and then we'll get into the
sure.
specifics. Because first thing I want people to know is that we have Matt, the town administrator, and Bruce is our volunteer extraordinaire. And one of the things we want to highlight is the extent to which this will come up later. You need a local champion, and you have a good example of the town and a local champion working together here. And it's one of these just great examples of how we want to build projects going forward, because it takes a lot of work to make these things happen. So we'll just kind of go a little bit deeper into how this unfolds and how it all works together, and we'll bring it back home, I promise. And this we'll start high and we'll work low into the details. So for folks who don't know where Orange is, it's midway between Fitchburg and Greenfield, kind of North Quabbin area. Route 2, you're driving out that way, and it's just west of Athol. And we zoom in a little bit further, next slide, on the Fisher Hill School, and it's right north of Orange, up near the woods. You got Fisher Hill itself. You have some nice brooks and nice swamps near there. And you can see the Millers River is a little bit to the south of there. Next slide. So for this, and this is kind of just a rough estimate for what we gathered is back in 2017, the Dexter Park School had been determined to be a building that wasn't going to go much further with the town, and I'm sure Matt and Bruce can talk more about that. And there was a vote to begin the study of replacing the Dexter Park School, which had been condemned, as I understand it. There was a 3-year community design process that took place. And what Bruce was saying is it was inclusive, it was designed to be responsive to local needs, and the whole objective was to get people on board with making a decision to build a new school. 2020, town meeting vote, 300 folks in favor, only 16 people opposed, which is never happens in town meeting. I don't know how you guys did that, but honestly, that threshold is really high for a new school. That's pretty impressive. In 2020, town meeting voted to begin the process of expending funds for building a new school. You have site preparation in 2020, 2021, you start to build the new school. 2023, the school is finished and the old Dexter Park school is demolished. So that, when you look at this, oftentimes the questions that we have from people are, hey, we want to do this. And what you see is this timeline, although for y'all, it probably felt like it happened really quickly. You see there's a number of steps along the way that get people to the place where you can have this nice facility for the community. So let's go over to the next slide. And here's just some slides of the Dexter Park school being demolished. In the lower left, you can see the new school, the flag. Lower left, you can see the new school. And so these are just some historical images of how the community got here. And we'll go over to the next slide. And this, so Bruce, do you want to talk about this is what people were really, really motivated in seeing happen at Fisher Hill School? This is what the community wanted to see when a new school was built.
Yes, and the only problem is how do you go from desires to actualizing, what people wanted to see, and we were able to get all of these things included in the new school. That photo that you had of the Dexter Park School being demolished, that is now a pollinator meadow. And at the far side of that pollinator meadow is the outdoor classroom. So it really comes full circle. The school was designed and is a county shelter. And so, we've managed to include that as well. It was tough going as to whether or not we were going to be able to do the solar part of the project just because of the state of the grid. I thought it would be quite simple, the same as when we started putting solar panels on our house at the farm. But that was not the case. And so if it wasn't for this pilot project, I'm not quite sure how this would have gone. The other part of it is that, the town could not afford to speculate during that typical group study process. It took about a year and a half of engineering between National Grid and Select. We got to select the company that did the project for us through Power Options, and I would recommend both of those organizations to help anyone with a municipal project. That is what they do, and we were very happy with the project as it was designed and built. I guess we can go to a next slide if you'd like. So as you can see, it did take years to be able to do this, and we went back and forth, looking at whether or not the battery was going to be able to be used for resilience, that is, if power went out. As it turns out, there really is a conflict between utilizing the battery for the various programs, connected solutions, as well as shaving peak demand versus having a battery on standby basis all the time. And so we chose, in the design of the system, and it was a requirement of National Grid in this pilot project to have the battery being able to be utilized for those programs, to lower costs for the school and for the town, and to be able to just make best utilization of the battery itself. Because if you just have a battery that's sitting there waiting for the power to go out, it's not going to be used very often. Yeah, I don't know if people have specific questions about how this all became integrated, and how the different grants were associated. We did get about $150,000 from National Grid to work with them in this pilot project. We got, I think it was $144,000 toward the battery through Green Communities. At that time, Green Communities was not funding solar panels. It was a battery only. And then we were able to work with the MVP program to enable the construction of the outdoor classroom, to have a variety of community engagements to talk about the project, and finally to build, the main act, which was putting the solar panels up on the roof and the battery as well. And Andrew, I don't know if you have photos of that part of the project.
Yeah, there's some images of the
Yeah.
battery and the solar. Yep. If you go kind of up forward 2 slides.
Yeah. So, this is a relatively small project. I would, if you're doing new construction the way we were, it pays to be a squeaky wheel and talk about designing your roof penetrations to allow for the best use of that roof for solar access. This was done sort of after the fact, and you have competing interests, and you see in the center photo at the top those skylights. Well, that's a critical part of what happens in the building. And after all, we were building a school. We weren't simply building a solar project. So we had all these compromises that we had to make. The left-hand photo you see, that's actually an inverter that's being installed that will be right next to the battery. The photo with the truck shows the battery being placed into service. The lower left shows the inverter and the battery. It's a relatively small battery. It's a 200, I think it's a 205 kilowatt hour battery. The project is 220 kilowatts on the roof, DC, and so there's a relative proportion to battery size and the project size of the panels themselves. We anticipate that this will year over year produce about 50% of the power that the school uses, saving an awful lot of money for the town, as well as producing green energy. The interesting part is the building, Dexter Park, that was torn down, didn't use nearly as much electricity because the whole ventilation system consisted of opening the windows. Now we have a state-of-the-art ventilation system in the school, which requires running a lot of motors to push that air around. And it actually, ironically increases the amount of electric use in the building. It's a project that, we're very proud of. And, now that the snow has finally melted off the roof, we hope to see production. The project came online at the very end of the year. Everyone, was given the go-ahead literally at the very end of December. That is permission to interconnect.
Bruce, we did get a question in the chat about working with utilities and other partnerships. Would you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. So the typical uh, way that this works is you have to design a project. So there's a cost. No one does this for free. The design is submitted to the utility, and now you're into the utility timeline. And when you go to their website, they will give you very specific numbers about how long this is all supposed to take. Do not buy it. It's not true. It always takes much longer. I can tell you that from my own personal experience at the farm doing projects here. And it was only by, so just getting back to it. So the development, the design of a project itself, we were able to escape that by using, going through power options and using their pre-approved vendor, Select Energy. And they were able to do this at no cost to the town. I mean, ultimately, if we decided to go forward with the project, obviously we had to pay for it. But they were willing to engage with the utility to do the design. I can't tell you how many different meetings we had with 10 different electrical engineers trying to figure out how this was going to work. But I referenced Bill's question early on. This whole idea of curtailment is really pretty new, although it's been used in other states extensively, particularly in California and Hawaii, where they have a lot of solar. But it's good that projects are now able to come online, taking curtailment into by being able to utilize curtailment as part of the engineering, rather than just saying, well, you have to pay to upgrade the grid, which can be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bruce, before we, or Andrew, before we kind of hand things off to some questions, is there anything else that we wanted to cover?
Well,
I just want to say how important it is to have someone who's willing to get on the phone and answer all these questions. I know as a person who has met Bruce, Bruce is not afraid to call you and ask questions. And I think being persistent, being the squeaky wheel, and not really taking a no without a good justification for why it's a no. Bruce is always really good at saying, well, why is that? And I think oftentimes as you're doing these really complicated processes, you need someone who's willing to just pick up the phone and call people until there's more understanding about why a no is a no. And then you end up with a system that operates within the context of what the original no was, if that makes sense. You have a system, you just don't have it plugging into the whole grid, So it's really the need to have a champion that can work on this for a dedicated period of time is really something that towns need to replicate. And the fact that Matt, as the town administrator, I mean, you to some extent you empowered Bruce to be a local champion, and I think that speaks confidence on your part. I think that's really brave, and it resulted in a good thing.
Yeah, the town. Hi, Matt 40. I don't know if everybody can hear me, but from a town administration standpoint, especially in these towns out in Western Mass and smaller towns, we just don't have the funding to pay somebody to spearhead, decade-long projects like this. So having Bruce here, who's a resident, an unpaid volunteer, being willing to put in the time and effort to get this done was very important. There is a responsibility on management side, that's the select board, the town meeting, if you're in a city council, etc. There is a responsibility to help these projects go forward. You can't just let volunteers go off and do everything themselves. There's an administrative function, and there's a function of getting overall town support. I mean, you saw the general support for the school building construction project. We had similar town meeting votes in Orange to support the funding for the solar project as well. So there was a big effort on the legislative side of the town and on the executive side of the town to help support the idea of this project going forward, and then letting Bruce and others on the Town of Orange Energy Committee, who are all unpaid volunteers, go forward with it. My function in this project was simply from a grant management and budget management side of things. Bruce was the main point of contact for construction, and we met several times along with Andrew Smith and others as the project went out. But definitely the teamwork made the dream work in this situation. And I think that other towns and cities can do it in Massachusetts. I want to thank MVP and Green Communities for helping support to fund this. And I especially want to thank Bruce for being a local champion. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So with that, we do have a couple number of questions that have came in, and so some specific about Orange and some more general. So I think while we have Bruce and here, I think let's start with a few of the Orange specific ones. So do you know if the Orange PV and BESS, is it town owned or a PPA?
It's town owned.
Town owned.
And the reason why we were able to do that, well, in the first case, a PPA would not have worked in our situation, because going into it, no one would have known what the costs were of designing a non-export system. There were an awful lot of unknowns at the beginning of the process. The other thing is that the federal government still had direct pay, so that municipalities could take advantage of a tax rebate. And so between the grants that we were able to get from Green Communities, MVP, as well as National Grid, the direct pay tax credit will cover the remainder of the balance. So the town of Orange will wind up paying $0 for the project. I hope that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Next, we have, was there a comparison done on cost to construct and operate traditional powered solar and solar/BES powered school? And if there's any insight you have to the return on investment?
So we did discuss having solar and curtailment, because that's what would have been the way it would have worked. Remember that this needed to be a net zero export. The battery is a really expensive part of the expensive component as a part of the system, but it is what National Grid wanted to experiment with as a pilot project, because going forward, I think this is a model. Many more of these projects will be able to come online well before the grid is upgraded to absorb all of this energy that's being generated. So we didn't do a formal comparison, because this is what National Grid wanted. They want to generate the data from it and test the hardware and software parts of the program, but we did discuss it.
Perfect. Then next we have from Shelley, is there a sources and uses to show expenses and funding that you can share? And I do know that we have a lot more detail. Maybe Andrew, you can jump in on this, but we do have a lot more details available online about the Orange project. Andrew, anything you want to share here?
In terms of the budget and everyththing else, like the costs. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, other than what the 390K that MVP contributed.
Yeah,
I think
I have these memorized.
Yeah, well, I think it's probably on a case by case basis. I don't know if that's something that we would be able to share out. Correct, Andrew?
They all vary, yeah. Every system's going to vary for sure.
Yeah, so I can tell you in Orange's case, the total project cost was $920,000. And I want to say that the battery portion of it was about $350,000 or $60,000. You also have to remember that there was a lot of unique hardware that was brought on. National Grid wanted to have backups for their backups to make sure that there was no export from the site. They were very careful about that. And so I think that drove the cost, not to mention, the cost of engineering a one-off. Now that it's been built, of course, the second one is always cheaper.
Great. Next, we have a question. Does it make sense to use resistive or other heaters to melt snow off the panels? It may depend on every degrees of the way the roofs are. It does seem like the orange panels are somewhat flat. So just wondering how you have handled that with the snow that has came in, especially recently.
Yeah, so they're at 5 degrees. I've never heard of a resistance heating system that would do, a good job. I think if you have a pitched roof, you're in a whole different, system. But parking lot canopies would suffer the same fate. The truth of the matter is that while you do generate some power during the winter, as a percentage of what you're generating, year over year, it's a small amount. I will tell you that, we have about 30 kilowatts here on the farm, and I scrape those panels. It's a lot of work. So, yeah, it would be unsafe to be on the roof when you get a 2-foot snowfall. That roof would be completely covered with snow. So, you'd be talking about melting. I don't see it as a practical solution.
Great. Next, we have there's so much open land on the school grounds. Was there any consideration of adding ground-based solar in addition to the rooftop solar?
We did think about it, but just because of logistics and because of different program availability, the state really has a propensity. It's a goal to do rooftop solar. In our particular case, it's just a cheaper way to go. You have to remember that now you're dealing with voltage that you've got to move from one part of the site to another. We did think about it, and anything's possible for the future. I don't know. I'd love to be able to generate that other 50% of the use of the school, but this is where we wound up for a variety of different reasons, not the least of which were the state incentives to do the project the way it is.
Awesome. And then,
by the way,
sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, by the way, the photo on the left that you see, that's where Dexter Park was demolished, where that fellow's working. So.
And then we have another kind of similar question about the solar funding. So can you give us any thoughts that you have on the cost of solar and how much per watt was the solar having to take into account prevailing wages? And what was the cost of battery array? I know we're kind of throwing a lot at you there.
Right. So like I said, my recollection is the battery was about $350,000 of the cost. I think, again, there was some unique hardware that's involved that was certainly in the upper 5 figures, if not 6 figures. So that I couldn't actually break it down. A simple rooftop system would be far lower, cost per watt. And so that this is not really a good example, because of the pilot nature of the project.
Great. And then again from Shelley, just wondering, was this grant project 100% grant funded?
So the way the funding broke down, The cost of the project was about $920,000. We received $144,000 from Green Communities toward the battery only. We received about $350 or $60,000 from MVP, but that also included about $50,000 for the outdoor classroom. And we received about $150,000 from National Grid. The remainder is being made up by the direct pay federal payment tax credit.
Thank you. And then just one more follow-up on the solar question about how many kW is the solar array?
It's 217 DC.
Just real quick to go back to the grant funding, one of the considerations.
In other words, how long are they expected to last?
Oh,
How long are the panels expected to last?
Yes.
You know, it's interesting. I get this question all the time. The very first solar panel that was ever built is still in use. They can you can get a panel that does go bad, but it's not common. They do lose a certain percentage. I think the warranty is 0.5% or less per year. And often, you know, you'll hear that there are 20-year lifespans. That's simply not the case. It could well be the fact, you know, the case that, you know, in 20 or 25 years, the efficiency of the panels goes out, or goes up so that you want to replace them. You know, early panels that are 100 and 200 watts that people are replacing now with 500 and 600 watt panels, you know, people are giving them away for free. They're just outdated technology.
Perfect. All right. The questions have been coming in bunches, so just give it a minute if there's anything else that people want to continue to talk about, or as we take a brief pause, if there's anything further that you wanted to share, Bruce.
No, it's been a great project. I'm ready to move on, and we're going to try to put a large project on our landfill. Not the least of which is because, you know, there are state incentives to be able to do that, and it's a great use of land that's otherwise being unused.
Patrick, while you're gathering the questions up, one of the things I want to point out is that this was on a new building. So from a grant making standpoint, the town had a lot of capital invested just in terms of the process of building the new building and financing the new building. So really this was, you know, it's like they built the cake. We're just putting the icing on it. So I think sometimes, you know, that the whole picture tells us the complete story of how the funding pieces lined up.
And I don't know for, you know, those out there that may be contemplating a new school, I don't know what the rules and regulations around MSBA are now, you know, if they would accommodate, you know, solar or geothermal or other technologies, just as a matter of course. You know, when we started the project way back when, you know, 10 years now, you know, geothermal was just experimental. I mean, people were not going that way. That's why we have a conventional gas-fired boiler. I'm hoping that MSBA is reconsidering or has reconsidered, you know, being able to fund, you know, those kinds of technologies in the construction of the new schools.
Hi, this is Joanne. I can confirm that, Bruce. MSBA has been evolving over time, and there have been several new schools built with geothermal technologies, and those schools are also eligible for the federal tax credit. So it makes it cost competitive to conventional heating and cooling.
Yeah, I think of the Acton Boxborough, the photo that you showed of their battery storage, which I believe is about a megawatt. I think that's one of the districts that has geothermal.
That is correct. Yes.
All right, we have another question from Bill. This is, I think, a bit more general and something that I think we'd have to check in with our other colleagues about. Bill asked about with federal incentives gone, how much can the state make up, and what is the future? Can improvements in PV efficiency offset the loss of federal tax credits? And are panels getting cheaper fast enough? I think this is something, Bill, I'm going to put my email in the chat, and I think we'd love to follow up with you when we have a bit more information on that. But some of my other colleagues, if you want to jump in, please do so too. All right. And again, for everyone in the chat, I am adding my email for everyone. Please follow up with us and would love to continue these conversations.
So I'll just add one last thing. I know that on our project, and in order to qualify for everything, it was all prevailing wage. And so that is a cost driver in a project like this.
All right. Well, with this, I'm going to do kind of our last call for any incoming questions. Thank you so much for all the engaging questions, anyone. I see we've handled over 20, and we love to see some people focus in on such unique projects, and we'd love the opportunity to show some success that has came out of MVP and group communities, and that, of course, is this project Orange Mass. And we really hope that we can continue doing projects like this in the future. And again, this was while we're recording this. Would love to still follow up and would meet with anyone that wants to discuss further in the future as well. So again, just last call on questions before we wrap. Slightly early, but we've really done. I feel like a lot here today. All right. Well, with nothing else coming in, we are going to end this webinar. But again, we'll be posted online and happy to have further conversations in the future as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Well done.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.